Okay, what did I read today? Seems like a lot of news about division, I guess, where people aren't going to be able to agree with each other. Well, the first one I read dealt with things like detect and avoid in terms of airports and drones. I guess they're coming soon in select places. This one says, FAA selects 5 host airports to test and evaluate unmanned aircraft detection and mitigation systems. The Federal Aviation Administration today selected 5 host airports to evaluate technologies and systems that could detect and mitigate potential safety risks posed by unmanned aircraft. The effort is part of the agency's Airport Unmanned Aircraft System Detection and Mitigation Research Program. And it says here, in terms of the cities they selected, like what says, Atlanta, Syracuse, Rickenbacker, Huntsville, and Seattle-Tacoma. So those airports around there. These airports meets the FAA requirements for diverse testing environments and represent airport operating conditions found across the United States. And according to this, it says researchers plan to test and evaluate at least 10 technologies or systems at these airports. Testing will begin later this year and continue through 2023. So they don't know exactly which one will be the best for them at the moment, I suppose, or maybe it'll be a combination of ones. For example, I could see them using something like, say, Aeroscope, the one specifically for the DJI products, and then one for the other ones. And in terms of things that people can't agree with, I guess this is interesting to read down in Texas. It says that it becomes the biggest US state to lift COVID-19 mask mandate. So according to this, there's no, I guess, statewide regulation of sorts saying you have to wear things like a mask and stuff indoors. From what I gather, they're saying they have enough details of how the virus and stuff works and it's time for them to reopen. They have all the precautions and stuff in place with things like, I guess, vaccines and all that. But with that in mind, I guess some stores and stuff like here says Texas easing mask mandate puts retailers in a tough spot. And apparently companies, for example, like Best Buy and all that, they're still gonna have the mandate for things like masks. So yeah, complete division still. It makes you wonder if this will actually create more confrontations at the stores, because even here, a lot of people would have that argument saying it's the law, so follow it. Whereas here, if it's not like a law anymore and people are just doing it because they feel it's the best way to approach it, I can easily imagine again, like there are people having heated debates that result in physical confrontation. And in terms of disagreements, this was everywhere. Apparently there's some Dr. Seuss books that are being pulled off the shelf because people are claiming it demonstrates a lot of racism, I guess. This one here says, here are the wrong illustrations that got 6 Dr. Seuss books cancelled. 2 of the 6 permanently pulled from publication currently rank as the world's best-selling children's books. And one of the books is apparently titled, And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street, where this image has been going around saying the issue is, for example, the Chinese person walking around with chopsticks and all that. Apparently this was done voluntarily though. It says, we are committed to action. To that end, Dr. Seuss Enterprises, working with a panel of experts, including educators, reviewed our catalog of titles and made a decision last year to cease publication and licensing of the following titles. And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street, If I Ran the Zoo, McElligot's Pool, On Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, and The Cat's Quizzer. These books portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong. Ceasing sales of these books is only part of the commitment and our broader plan to ensure Dr. Seuss Enterprises catalog represents and supports all communities and families. So as you can imagine, this is creating huge division amongst people. Some people saying there's absolutely no issues with stuff like this, it's a children's book. Others say this is the reason why there's so much, I guess, racism and stereotypes and all that out in the world. That's why I thought it would be kind of interesting, because since it seems like a large part of this deals with people of Asian heritage, like Chinese people, for example, maybe I can give some thoughts about this. Funny enough, when I actually saw the picture, it reminded me how in school we actually read this, and it was actually explained to us before, where there were different versions of this book. For example, I believe in some previous publications, you had the same person there, the Chinese person with the chopsticks and all that, but the skin color was yellow. And it was explained to us that later on, down the road, they changed it just to have like a plain white skin, no colors or anything like that, because some people found it offensive, so they had to change it for reasons like that. So isn't that kind of interesting in that sense, where it was actually explained to us, I guess, as children on why it was the way it was. I guess with that factor, that's one of the reasons why I personally didn't see it racist in any way. I think it's more of an interpretation, if that makes sense. And you could say, for example, it's a really bad one. You can say it's very stereotypical, but to say it's, I don't know, in this context, racist, that's a little pushing it, I think. Now, is it harmful? Which I think is a completely different topic, because it's kind of interesting reading some of the comments. This guy here says, in regards to that picture of the person using chopsticks and all that, it says here, there are 1.4 billion people in China, and the huge majority use chopsticks when eating. If showing that is offensive, then by the same token, we should also immediately ban all books depicting barbaric Westerners using spoons, forks, and knives. Hooray! The world has been saved. No more Dr. Seuss, more time for kids to read porn, Pol Pot's Little Red Book, and AH's Mein Kampf. I have no clue what a lot of these ones are. It says, oh yeah, those are all still legal. A funny thought actually I have in mind, just in terms of things like, for example, chopsticks or forks and spoons. I mean, I think it's the same thing the other way around, where when you go to a Chinese restaurant, let's just say you go with your Caucasian friends or something like that, automatically they'll give you the chopstick, the Asian person, because they assume, oh, you know how to use it and so forth. But when there's a Caucasian person there, they'll be like, here's a fork and a spoon. And some people, they find that really offensive. Like, what are you trying to say? I don't know how to use like a chopstick after all this time or something like that. It's the same thing if you think about it in terms of stereotype in that way. So like there, if a Caucasian person was saying they found that offensive because they were being prejudged, would you say, no, what? There's nothing prejudging about that. Most people who, like you, so to speak, use forks and a spoon, so there's nothing whatever offensive about it, because that would be something to debate about there in the same context. Because there I could easily see and have seen people get, I guess you could say, offended over that. While again, I didn't really find it racist per se, I think one thing that people overlook, like here when coming up with examples like that, is how they're completely neglecting the factor on where you are, and you being, like, say, the visual minority, you are constantly put into this, I guess you could say, bucket. And in many ways, stuff like this can actually influence that. We're not the majority. I mean, it should be pretty obvious, isn't it? I mean, you're called a visual minority for a reason. And when a lot of people have these perceptions of you in a certain context, that could affect how you are perceived and what you could do. So for a comment like that, before you just jump to conclusions saying, oh, it's like this and all that, I mean, think of it like in the US, when I remember reading all those stories where black people were saying how when they get pulled over for a ticket or something like that, they try to make sure their ID and stuff is out in the open or easily accessible, where they don't have to reach their pocket, because they know, like in their experience, stereotypically, the cop will think they're pulling out a gun and they're gonna get shot. So that's why they do it the way they do. You would say there, like, well, that's ridiculous. Like, if you're not like the minority, I guess, like that never happens. You don't fear a cop shooting you just to pull over, what, your car where you potentially are getting a ticket. But with that said, I just think a lot of this does come down to things like education, because even as a child, that's the concern here, where people will read this and grow up to be some kind of racist, I guess you could say. I would be inclined to say maybe one of the issues is the adults aren't taking the time to explain to the children, like, what is this that they're seeing? Is it appropriate and all that? Because I even said myself, funny enough, with this book, it was actually explained to us very early on. Because it reminds me of the topic of violence in media, let's just say from a movie or a video game. A lot would say, if you grow up playing these violent games, watching these violent movies, then naturally you're going to grow up to be a killer or something like that. I mean, for myself, I probably play some of the most violent games there is, like what, Mortal Kombat and stuff like that. I mean, look how ridiculous that game is in terms of the fatalities and all that. You don't see me trying to uppercut people into spike pits and all that, ripping their heads off. You don't see me going stealing cars or whatever, like in Grand Theft Auto, kicking people out and driving like what, in the highway. I mean, to that I would say, well, I know the difference between what, something that's completely fictional versus reality. I would imagine for most children, and it was true for myself, I didn't really see racism as how an adult sees racism. If I see a picture or whatever that's, I guess you could say, quote, stereotypical and all that, I don't really form that opinion saying, oh, that's how those people are, so to speak, until the adult or something like that you're supposedly trusting for your education and all that actually tells you saying, oh yeah, that's the way it is, like 100%. So it's not even really so much about the material there as much as it is the environment you're around and what they actually teach you. Because in some ways, I would say it's actually important to have those points of references in history, like how it was like, and as long as you explain to, like, just say the child why it is the way it is back then, how it's potentially right or wrong, I think that's the more important thing overall. Alright, see you guys later.